Chris Sewall here, baseball card collector, investor, dealer in that order. Welcome everyone, time for another PSA reveal video. This is an 11 card order. It's all vintage, and this was sent in at the $30 level. This would have been sent in at the $19 level, but this was sent in a few months ago, and at the time, the $19 level, or whatever the cheapest level they had then, didn't allow for cards valued more than $99. It was sort of a weird in-between pricing system they had, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. But you couldn't send in cards. The max value you could send in for that level was $99. They've since upped that to $4.99, so these would have all been sent in at the $19 level if I sent this order in today. But again, back then it was sent in at the $30 level. 11 cards, all vintage, and like I have been doing recently with my PSA reveals, always guess the grade ahead of time, give it a 2-grade range guess, and then also we'll do sort of like a financial breakdown at the end so you can see, you know, what the added value to each card was by getting it graded. All right, so first thing to note is a card came in this cardboard. That means they wouldn't grade a card for some reason, and it's this Jim Palmer rookie, 1966 tops, and they labeled it mini size. So that's probably means it was miscut or was cut short at the factory, and they won't actually end up charging me for that, but they can't give it a grade because it's sort of short. In theory, it could be trimmed, but they don't see evidence of trimming. They just see that it seems to be short in one direction, so probably that was cut short at the factory. I'll sort of measure that at the end of the video here. I was looking for a 5 or a 6 on the Jim Palmer rookie, as you can see. All right, first card with a grade is a Reggie Jackson rookie. It got a 2, and I'd put 2 or 3 on the sheet. And yeah, this is pretty rounded corners. Actually, it doesn't look so bad here in the video, but they're a little more rounded than you can see. And I think there's even a really light crease on the front, but it doesn't really detract too much from the card. You can see it's a little off center. 2, you know, I put 2 or 3 on the sheet. 2 is a fair grade for the Reggie Jackson rookie here. And on a card like this, Reggie Jackson, even in low grade, you know, this is about a break-even situation by getting it graded. But I still like doing it just because it makes life a lot easier when you go to sell it if it's already in the holder than if you're trying to sell a card, you know, a lower grade card like that raw. Sent in 2 Charles Barkley rookies, 1986 Fleer Charles Barkley rookies. I was looking for a 7 or 8 on both of them. They're both really sharp, but you know, clearly not 10s or even 9s. They both had really minor issues. Looking for a 7 or an 8 on each. I was secretly hoping for an 8 on both of them, but the first one here got a 7, and you'll see the second one coming up in a bit. Nolan Ryan, second year, 1969 tops. This one got a 4, and I had guessed 4 or 5. And this was in the same collection as the Reggie Jackson. It has some notably rounded corners. No real major issues. You can see the centering is decent, and surface is all right. But yeah, it was definitely a mid-grade card, or even, you know, lower mid-grade with the corners, which again don't look so bad here in the video, but in person they're a little more rounded. Minnie Minoso rookie, 1952 tops, and this card's seen a huge jump in value in the last year plus, as he made the Hall of Fame last year, and this is the famous 1952 Topps set, and that's his rookie. So nice card. This is you know, can be a big money card if you get into sort of mid grade. Got a 2 here, and that's appropriate. It has a really light crease and some, you know, minor issues throughout. Harmon Killebrew rookie, 1955 tops, and this got a 3.5. And again, that's I had put 3 or 4 on the sheet, so that was spot on with my guess. And again, no major issues. Actually has pretty nice eye appeal, you know, but just sort of minor issues throughout. A little bit off center, left to right as you look at the card there. Some surface stuff, tipped corners, things like that. So no major issues, but enough minor issues to keep it from being a solid mid-grade card or better. George Brett rookie, 1975 tops, and this one got a 7. And I actually had put 6 or 7 on the sheet, but I actually thought this grade was a bit generous. It's a really sharp card, but you can see it's way off centered, left to right, like 80-20 or something like that. I didn't know how they would grade that, but I was realistically thinking 6, but I put 6 or 7 because I didn't think 5. I thought 5 would have been brutal, but luckily got the 7 here, and that's the first card you can see that was on the sort of high end of my guess range. Michael Jordan, third year, 1988 Fleer, and this was obviously a disappointing one. It got a 6, and I had put 7 or 8 on the sheet, but actually really was thinking 8. Like, this card, it has some really tipped corners, so it wouldn't grade a 10 or a 9, but I mean, it's sharp. It's centered well. There's really no issues. And I looked this over really close. I don't know why they graded it a 6. I thought that was a really harsh grade. I thought from what I see, 8 looked like the correct grade. You know, 7 would have been a bit strict, but 6 just seemed way too harsh. But it happens now and then. Here's the other Barkley rookie and another disappointing one. Same thing. This one got a 6, and this was another one. this one made a little more sense. There was some more notable stuff. The upper left corner was notably tipped. There was some like, you know, minor centering issues on the back, and the top bottom centering is a little bit off. I had put 7 or 8, and I thought 7 or 8 was more accurate, but again, they gave it a 6. So back to back, really harsh grades on the 80s basketball cards there. Next card is a 1995 Bowman Gold Scott Rowland rookie, and this got an 8, and I put 8 or 9. And you might think, why is this with the vintage? But so when they had that in between pricing I was talking about, they were sort of still figuring it out, and they were adjusting things regularly to try to tweak it to get it right. At the time I sent this in, their vintage was 1999 and back. So 1995 had to go in with their vintage section, which seems weird. They've since changed it. I think it's now 1979 and back, which makes a lot more sense to me. But yeah, at the time, this card had to go sent in with the vintage. And last card is a pre-war card, 1940 play ball, Harry Heilman. He's a Hall of Famer, sort of a low-end Hall of Famer, but it got a 3.5, and I'd guess 3 or 4, so that was spot on. And I like sending in cards like this. This isn't worth a whole lot, but this is like a really easy card to sell for full market value, or maybe a little bit over that, since there just won't be a lot of graded copies of this card available for sale anywhere, you know, at any one time. As pre-war graded Hall of Famers, sort of always, you know, always in demand. The demand sort of always outweighs supply with that stuff. But I forgot to mention, I sent in the Scott Rowland because I knew he was going to be elected, I knew the Baseball Hall of Fame election was coming up, and I thought he had a good chance of being elected. So I imagine that card would get a bump. And I wanted to look over the Jim Palmer closer because at glance I don't see anything wrong with it. Again, it's labeled as mini size, meaning it's probably cut just a little short at the factory. When I measured it against this Scott Rowland, I didn't see anything really here. It looked good to me. You know, measured on the front. It's tough to measure a card against a graded card. So went and got a 70s common to measure it against, and just sort of, you know, when you're measuring a card to see if it's trimmed or mini size, just sort of put it on top of the card and line it up and see if it rattles around or if it holds firm, like as you hold it by the borders. And here, I mean, I could tell it was mini size left, right, but it's super minor. I mean, it's about as minimal as you can get. But yeah, I get why PSA did that. You probably can't even see here in the video anything, but it made sense once I lined it up. But again, super minimal. I imagine if you graded this, generally this would pass. But in this case, they said it was mini size enough to not grade it. But yeah, so I probably won't resubmit this. I might go with SGC on it, but more likely I'll just sell it as is like this with the PSA, you know, mini size label, so there's no confusion to a potential buyer. So overall, this order was not great. You know, the Jim Palmer didn't grade, got 2 cards lower than the predicted range, and basically everything else was on the low end. You know, the George Brett was the one exception that got in the high end of my prediction. 2 cards were right in the middle, but for the most part, you know, overall, I would call this, you know, a not great result given my predictions and what the grades were. All right, so now we're going to run through the cards one by one and look at what the added value was. And again, the grading fee was $30 for this order, but I'm going to call it $35 because there's a bunch of, you got to pay shipping and insurance 2 different ways. And that can range depending on how many orders you're shipping at once, how many cards in the order. But we're just going to call it $35 roughly total grading fee per card. So this Harry Heilman in this grade raw probably goes for around $40. I can see the grading fee was $35, and now in a PSA 3.5, I expect to get about $80 for it. So overall, this only added about $5 total, net profit for me by getting it graded. But again, I think there's also a benefit in just the fact that it's going to be a lot easier to sell, and there'll be a lot less issues with potential buyers not being happy with, you know, a grade that you claim it to be raw. The Minoso was one of the better hits of the order, roughly $130 raw, and now it's about $300 in a PSA 2, so added over $100 there. The Killebrew was kind of nice as well, maybe $100 raw, now $200 card, $65 added. The Barclays were both losses. The PSA 6 was a $35 loss, and the PSA 7 was about a $15 loss. You know, all these numbers are rough, approximated, of course. The Jordan was the biggest loss in the order, a $40 loss. Again, I really thought this deserved an 8, but it getting a 6 meant a $40 loss. For the Jim Palmer, there's a number of categories where PSA won't grade the card, but then they won't charge you. And mini size is one of those examples. So I didn't get charged for this one. There's certain categories where they do charge you, like trimmed or altered. They still charge you, but this was one where they didn't, so no grading fee. But it still had to pay the shipping and insurance both ways, so we're calling it the $5. I thought the card was worth about $50 raw. I don't know what it would sell for in this holder. Like if I went to sell it as is, I would include the PSA label saying it's mini size. I think it would probably still fetch around $50. I'm not really sure, but I also might consider sending it to SGC, like I said. So we're just going to call this a $5 loss on the Jim Palmer. The Reggie Jackson was more or less a break even, as I mentioned. You can see $85 card raw, about $125 in the holder. The Nolan Ryan was a little bit of a bump, going from about $175 up to $250, so about a $40 increase. The George Brett was a nice increase, getting a little over $100 in added value, going from $150 up to $300. Again, in the 7, this might be a little tougher to sell for full market value, given that it's off center. You know, most vintage collectors care more about centering than anything else, but yeah, we'll see. And the Scott Rowland sort of gets an asterisk. So on paper, it's actually a loss. Went from a $50 card up to an $80 card when I got it back. But I sent it in with the knowing that he had a chance of getting elected to the Hall of Fame in the near future. And after I got the card back, shortly thereafter, he got elected, and the card jumped way up in value from $80 up to $200. So on paper, it's a $5 loss, but I sent it in sort of with that understanding. So add that all up, and this is basically a $265 net positive result for me, meaning I'm going to, make roughly $265 more because I got them graded than if I had just sold everything raw. And to be honest, that's not a great result, but I mean, it's not a bad result either. And there's a couple reasons why that number couldn't have been higher. It could have been higher. Main one is I was expecting better grades overall, but also the Scott Rowland, I put on there as a $5 loss. It's realistically going to be more like a $100 gain. Now that he made the Hall of Fame. And also, again, these were sent in at the $30 level because at the time I was sending them in, PSA's service levels and pricing was just sort of wonky. Today, these would be sent in at the $19 level, which is more where they belong, and that would have saved $100 some odd as well. And last point I'll make, which is one I make in a lot of my reveal videos recently, is so if you look at the Minoso and the Brett, that's basically where all the profit is. If you remove the Minoso and the Brett and just had the other 9 cards, it would essentially be break even. And that's often what you're kind of going, or often what I'm kind of going for with a PSA order. Like you send in a bunch of cards and you're looking to get some really, really nice bumps on just a few of them, and everything else, I'm looking to more or less break even on, maybe make small gains everywhere else. But if you consider orders as a whole, that's going to be fine if you do that. If you are always, focused on one card, or, don't like the grade of this card, or then often there'll be major, major disappointments. But if you consider orders as a whole and think of it that way, I think that's a sort of a smarter way to sort of attack it if you're a reseller. But that's it. Thank you everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and let me know if anyone has any questions about any of this in the comments. Happy to answer it as best as I can, and see you all again next time. Thanks everyone.